Hi, everyone. This is Nathalie de Marcé,
Michael Wozniak.
and today we have a very, very special guest. We have with us Nick Kemp. Hi, Nick. It's very, very nice to have you with us today. And why don't you present yourself to everyone so that they know exactly who you are?
Okay, and if in 5 minutes nobody's left, we'll know the presentation didn't go very well. But let me start simply at the beginning. I've always been interested in communication and how to figure stuff out and problem solve. And back in the 70s and 80s, I was very much involved in personal change, personal development. Came across NLP in the 90s, trained in NLP, did all the different badges, practitioner, master practitioner, trainer, Lord of the Universe, well, okay, not that one, but did all the NLP stuff. And then I heard from one of the co-creators of NLP about this guy called Franck Farrelly. And he said, well, a lot of people influence the beginning of NLP. And if you think I'm crazy, you should meet Franck. And at that time, 130 would-be master practitioners in London all leaned forward and wrote, Franck Farrelly, crazier than Richard Bandler. And within a couple of weeks, I heard from a good friend of mine, Andy T. Austin, that Franck was coming to the UK. So I didn't know anything about Franck. I mean, it's the best kept secret since, you've ever had a secret. So I went to a workshop with Franck on the South Coast, which was like a 4-day workshop. And literally, I sat there totally mystified. I just go, I have got no idea what the hell this is. I mean, this does not fit. It does not fit into the NLP model, doesn't fit into the Milton model, doesn't fit into the meta model, doesn't fit into any personal change stuff I've done. It's like the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. But the demos I'm seeing are quite fascinating, and I'm really interested in knowing more. So, bearing in mind that there were only 17 people in this workshop. It's one of the worst promoted workshops in the history of workshops. So I started talking to Franck and I said, well, I would be interested in hosting you in Leeds. And Franck's immediate response was, oh yeah, you got any money? I went, yeah, actually I do have money. And not only that, I have actually run events before. So Franck came to Leeds and I started in 2005 to present his trainings, but also to record a lot of his material because Richard Bandler had said, which Franck quoted back in the 80s, talking about Franck, we see you as the rocket scientist of the whole field of psychotherapy, of personal change. You only have one problem. And Franck went, oh yeah, what's that? He went, marketing, which I agree with because when I met Franck, there was virtually no information at all. It was just ridiculous. So I started learning Franck's style of working, which is radically different to everything else, and also began to include and add elements of what I found worked very well from NLP, hypnosis, and other approaches, which became what I now call Provocative Change Works. Those NLPers watching will appreciate the embedded suggestion that every time somebody says Provocative Change Works, into the universe goes the suggestion that it really does. And so I was good friends with Franck and hosted him for many, many years and learned huge amounts from him. When he passed away, he sent me his entire archive of work going back to the 1960s, wow, which I'm still now gradually transcribing digitally. But from Provocative Therapy came Provocative Change Works, which is now what I teach all around the world, in Europe, more so in Japan, recently in Russia, America, and different parts of Europe, which is where we are today. I have actually been to Switzerland and taught in Geneva a few times as well.
Okay, nice. So perhaps the first question that that came out was from Martial from France. Why why provoking people? Why?
Why? Okay, it's a good question. Well, let me turn the question on its head and say, if you have somebody who comes with any kind of a problem, it could be a coaching problem, it could be a therapeutic problem, it could be a business problem, whatever. It's all the same thing. It's all essentially a problem. So in order to create some kind of change, you've got to affect some momentum in either the thinking or the process or what's going on. So when we're talking about provoking, we're talking about stimulating or producing some kind of change. You know, the opposite way of looking at that is say, well, we're not going to produce any kind of change, and we'll just sit here and see if anything happens. Or we'll do the same thing which hasn't worked many times over. So the idea of provoking, which comes from the Latin provocare, which means to call out, is to start to is to generate or stimulate something new that changes the energy in a situation and produces something more helpful as a result. So that's why it's called provocative. Whatever term you come up with, somebody's going to go, yeah, but why isn't it called this? You know, you never find the perfect term. But in the nature of the interactions, which are all conversational, are to work in a way to get people to think differently. That's the heart, and it's all about producing tangible results, not more theoretical stuff. And Franck was very, very hot on that, and that's why Richard Bandler and John Grinder were so interested in him, because back in the 80s, he was working in Mendota Mental Hospital with clients that nobody else could do anything with. Comatose clients, schizophrenics, serial killers. Nobody wanted to go anywhere near these people. So the very nice, polite pot of Earl Grey tea, quiet chat is not going to work with Mr. Serial Killer. So his work was very, I mean, Franck, when I saw him, he'd been in clinical work for 50 years, was an absolute fountain of knowledge and insights, having originally, of course, trained with Carl Rogers.
Okay. There will be a question about Carl Rogers later on. Yeah.
Yes, Loïc has a question specifically about provoking, because sometimes people misunderstand and think that provoke is to say rude words to people.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? Are we insulting people, or what is it about?
Okay. If you're insulting the client, or if you're adopting some kind of strategy, which is like being in a James Bond movie, torturing some North Korean suspect, you're not doing it right, you know? So this is not, I say this the world over. I should have an actual auto cue of things to talk about, but I understand the question. This is the frame of the conversation is absolutely like talking to an old friend. So it's a teasing banter between two different people. It is not aggressive. It is not being abusive. That's nothing. If you watch Franck work, you'll see he never does that. But it's talking on a human one-to-one basis about things, how things actually are. Getting rid of all the usual jargon terms and stereotypical therapeutic terms, which mostly just get in the way. Now, Franck talked about classic talk therapy as, like he used to call it, the psychological archaeological dig. And he'd say there used to be dig deeper, back to sort of like an amoeba level of evolution. So finally, there's some form of illumination, which mostly there isn't. So the style of working is friendly, repeat, friendly, like talking to an old friend on a human-to-human connection.
Yes, I do remember that Franck explained that he was, I think, the 11th son of a family, and they all used to tease each other, and that's where the basic of provocative therapy came from.
Yeah.
He used to explain that way. No,
Yeah.
You had to survive telling each other some kind of provocating thing.
Absolutely. I mean, he was in a very big family. And it meant the interaction between people was always very conversational, always very friendly, always very well intentioned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Then Sophie is asking, aren't there any risks when provoking people?
Well, if I was talking, I'd say, well, what risks? Here's the question. Often people go, yes, but what if you talk to this imaginary client that we have not yet defined, and the client then decides to do this, and then this follows, and then this follows. And so there's a huge imaginary thread of information. It's like, what if your client then decides to commit suicide by jumping off the top of the Eiffel Tower? They land on some Russian diplomat. The Russian diplomat then creates a war with France. Now the whole of the West is in war. Now America steps in and the whole planet explodes. And you go, well, it's a lovely theory, but here's my question. What if you don't provoke any useful change in the client, but you continue to take payment for them, and you continue to leave them in a stuck state in which they feel increasingly more helpless and more disempowered? That's more of a problem. So when Franck was working and he was given the catatonic clients that none of the psychotherapists wanted to work with and none of the counselors wanted to work with, these people were really, really tough cases. And he's documented as having great results with a lot of these people. That's why Bandler was so interested in him. When I interviewed Bandler many years ago, his quote was, he said, Franck was one of the only people who's actually doing anything. And he said, when he was in Berkeley, he found Franck's original book. This is a first edition copy. You never see these. These are the blue versions. You only ever see the brown versions. First edition of Provocative Therapy. Wow. And Bandler was savvy enough to say he's one of the few people that was actually getting real results. Mm-hmm. So the end of the day, and Franck would always say, show me the evidence. And the same thing I said, show me the evidence of things. There's more problems created by not actually assisting a person in change than are with the theory of maybe what if somebody does something. Because here's the reality, which a lot of people may find a bit of a light bulb moment. Whatever you do, you never know fully what's going to happen. You work with the best interests of the clients, with the best ethical considerations. When people learn this style of working, if it's a PCW model, there's extensive training. It's not like a weekend course where we all go, yeah, we've got our certificates and we are unleashed into the wide world. There's extensive training and paying attention to what's actually going on. Requires a lot of attention. Franck, similarly with provocative therapy, was very, very rigorous about people being trained. So short answer is you never know what's going to happen, but this toolkit and all my experience of working with it for now 15 years is it's highly effective. And I've done the other approaches, so I can compare the two.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, Michael is asking, what was Franck's academy background?
Franck's background was mostly he was a social worker, And he originally trained with Carl Rogers in client-centered therapy. And he was working, if you look at his original book, he was working with I think it must be an American teenager. And it was in his 83rd session of working with this teenager. And it's like every single session was like Groundhog Day. It's just like the same thing. And those here who are watching this will know there are clients where you look at your calendar and you go, oh my God, I'm sure their mums love them, but here we go again. And in the 83rd session, Franck broke protocol from what he normally did. And he said, is any of this actually of any benefit whatsoever? And for the first time in 83 sessions, the teenager started to respond differently. And he went, oh, that's interesting. And so he started to work a lot more conversationally with people and found he started to get much, much, much better results. Because rather than adopting the sort of stereotypical look over the glasses and go, okay, so Michael, what seems to be the problem? Cue 20 minutes of doom and gloom. How does that make you feel? Cue more analysis. When you were 5 years old, did your dog run off into the forest? And what did your mother think about that? Cue, okay, see you again next week. There's nothing wrong with analysis, and there's nothing wrong with looking at the past for things, but this is much more talking directly to the client to figure out what can be changed in the here and now. You know, when I was in Moscow, God bless them, Sergey and Camilla, who were just great hosts, like every time I spoke to them, said, well, there's more people coming to the workshop. And I went, okay, well, last time it was 80. What is it now? It's 100. Wow, all right. And then a week before they went, it's 120. And where are these people coming? Or are they coming from all over Russia? Okay, and then on the day is 140 people, most of whom were professional coaches or trainers. So they were not the casual, I walk the dog, wash my hair, I want a weekend of personal whoopee type enthusiasm. They're interested in, okay, what can you do with these skills? Show me what you can do. I'm not interested in, the theory's great, but show me the evidence of what you can do. And both Franck's philosophy and my philosophy were absolutely, let's see what we can do with stuff.
Okay, thank you. And then Matthew is asking, how do you deal with possible abreactions?
Right, well, possible abreactions is about as giant a generalization as you could possibly get in the history of generalizations. But I'll answer it as best I can. It's like asking the question, what do you do if the client gets upset? We need to get it into more context. First of all, we got to talk about what is an abreaction. You know, if we're working in a therapeutic context, somebody, you might unintentionally say something and it might trigger a massive response in a client, which is beyond what would be normal or usual in the context or the situation. So beyond what is normal. In this situation, you're always looking to change how the client is thinking and how the client is feeling. So mostly the simple answer is watch and listen to what's going on in the session. If a client starts to go into, say, a tearful state, that does not necessarily mean it's a bad thing. You know, I did a training once for an NLP group, very young NLP group, and you know, I was asked to go in and do 2 days on Provocative Change Works. As soon as a client, sort of one of the demo subjects, started to become tearful, a herd of NLPers wanted to go in and rescue this demo subject. I go, step away from the demo subject. They're processing stuff they've had for years and years and years. They're quite happy to process it. You may feel uncomfortable because you're actually watching a change in emotions, but mostly look at what's actually happening in the context. Now, if you're working using provocative therapy or provocative change works, you're always tracking and watching what happens with the clients. you're always going to get at some point some kind of reaction which is unexpected. That's the nature of human beings. If you work with enough people, you're going to get that. So firstly, you need to be at ease in yourself in terms of what happens. I'll give you one quick example which comes to mind very much from doing this. I'm working with a guy and he's in his mid-40s. He's incredibly stressed. Work-wise, he's really under pressure. Socially, he's under pressure. His relationships are under pressure, and financially, he's under pressure. And I'm seeing him, and we're doing some work, and he's responding quite well. And then he stands up and goes, I feel a little bit strange. And then he goes, vroom, straight down on the floor.
Wow.
And I'm looking and going, that's interesting. That has happened very, very often. So I go, okay, Marc, just lie there and relax. The first thing is, okay, check his airways, check his breathing, check his ABC, standard medical stuff, airways, breathing. Say, okay, he's alive. That's good. You know, it's always a good sign. And work with what's actually happening in the situation. He was fine. He was just extreme amount of stress. As soon as he started to let it go, physically, everything just started to sort of like wind down, and it caused that reaction. So the thing is, if you're working with any kind of people, it's useful to have enough ease in yourself to recognize that things will happen, you know. Now, of course, if somebody starts having a fit, then you call some sort of medical advice. But I mean, I've worked with thousands and thousands of people, and a number of instances which have been problematic, I could just put on one hand. At some point, you're going to get it. But you can't sort of in a workshop be endlessly saying, yes, but what if the client does this theoretical scenario? And then what if the client then starts, what if the client brings out a Kalashnikov and starts shooting everyone in class? Well, that would be a little bit unfortunate. But providing there's enough people left in the class, we could continue for the second and third day, and hopefully you would be arrested. The what if questions are completely fictitious. And whatever you ask, people can always come up with something else.
Absolutely.
So I always have a little bit of patter that I use when I talk to clients to sort out the what if questions.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes, we have also a question from Santiago, who says, what are the best results that you had with provocative therapy? Can you share with us an anecdote?
Sure, I can give you some examples. I mean, and what I'm talking about is the Provocative Change Works model, because mostly it includes everything that Franck does, but other results as well. So, okay, let's think of a couple that spring to mind. I mean, there's lots of therapeutic ones, but the ones which I really like are measurable ones, you know, where you can go, well, okay, we can measure the success of this beyond any interpretation. So the first one was client came to see me, and I had a client ring me up, and she said, is that Nick Kemp? I said, sure. She goes, is everything in complete confidence? I went, yeah, absolutely. How can I help you? Well, she says, I'm an international athlete. I'm due to be competing for the trials to be in the Commonwealth Games in 8 weeks, and I need to get my best time ever, beat my lifetime best in order to qualify. Can you help me? And I said, well, number one, I'm not going to be running along with you, so let's just get that clear from the outset. And, you know, enthusiastic as I am, my days of running the 200 meters are well and truly over with. But I will do what I can, because I've worked with a lot of people in athletes and sports before, athletics and sports, and done pretty well. So she comes to see me. And I say, okay, so what's the problem? Hence, what's the issue at the moment? Before I start the race, I get really nervous and anxious, she says. Okay, now in PCW, the $1 million question is, how is the person creating the problem? That's what we're interested in. She's talking about this feeling state here, which results in losing time here. How is this happening, and what do we want to do to alleviate and change the sequence of what's happening. So I say to her, okay, so before you start to feel the anxiety, well, what's going on? What are you noticing that's happening, either in terms of your feeling, or if I was going to draw sort of like some bubbles above your head as a cartoon, what would you typically be saying to yourself? And she goes, I know this sounds crazy, but I think to myself, this is really going to hurt. Not the best internal dialogue I would suggest. I've never heard any coach suggest to any athlete, think about the most anxious, paralyzing phrase you can come up with before you start the exercise. So I work with that and we sort that out, and she goes away and she comes back the next week and says, I'm amazed. I've had no anxiety at all, but I still haven't got my best time because the people I'm running against aren't running fast enough. I'm beat them all, but they're not fast enough to nudge me quicker into the time. Okay, I say, what else would be useful? I need to be faster off the blocks to start with, because that would give me like another half second on my time. Okay, bring up YouTube, put her in a nice trance state, play the YouTube clip on your marks, set, just get the right state of attention and relaxation before the release and during the race. And off she goes. And I'm thinking, oh, I wonder what's going on with Lucy, a week later. And interestingly enough, a couple of hours later, I get an email going, I just got my lifetime fastest time. I've qualified for the Commonwealth Games. Go, Lucy. There's a result that is she says, my coach does not understand what you did to get me to be that much more proficient. Well, it's simple, because every feeling state can only be really created by 4 different things. NLPers should know this. Basically, see externally and think, hear externally and think, visualize internally and think, and internal dialogue creates feeling state, determines behavior, internal sequence, and also any external things that are going on. Change any of these variables and you'll change the sequence. Oh, and during a session, a car alarm went off and she was like this straight away. There's a clue. External auditory, big effect. So that was one example. The other example was a guy who wanted to swim the channel. Again, I said, there's no way I'm swimming the channel with you, not for any hourly rate whatsoever. And he was an amateur swimmer doing a swim for charity. And I worked with him on 5 different occasions, and he kept a video diary, which was part of the deal. I said, I'll do the first one, I'll charge. The rest, as it's for charity, I'll do pro bono, providing you keep a video diary. And at the end, we do a documentary, which is on nickkemptherapy.com. You'll find it there. If you drown halfway across, then, well, we'll not really mention it any further, but hopefully all will go well. So the day comes after 5 sessions. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, pitch dark in Dover. In you go into the water. Keep going until you get to Calais. Not anything I would particularly enthuse about doing. And 17 hours and 55 minutes later, Pete Windridge France is walking on the beach in Calais as only one of 3 out of 10 people who managed to do that swim. And he got the money for his son's minibus. And it was life-changing for him.
Wow.
So I would say good result.
Absolutely. I do have an anecdote with provocative therapy. When I met you in 2006 in New York, Franck worked with me. I wanted to get pregnant. And now
not by Franck. Let's just make that clear.
Not by Franck. Absolutely. No. I had some issues with the getting pregnant. I don't know. And no, by Franck. And yes, I have, my daughter has today 13 years. and it was amazing. I got pregnant 15 days after coming back from the workshop, and I have the recording, and 5 years later, I decided, why not hear it again? And I heard it again, and my son is a result of hearing the session again. So I don't know what Franck did, what he said. I know I had a fantastic time being on stage with him, and what is amazing of being having the opportunity to be with him was, yes, he was provoking and teasing, but at the same time he was very caring, and I don't remember if he held my hand, or he I know he was touching just the arm.
Yeah.
But it was amazing how cared I was feeling, and that's my anecdote with provocative therapy. There's my 2 kids, so it's
Yeah, there you go, living proof.
yes.
Well, the difference between how Franck works in classic therapy is simple. In classic coaching, NLP, and classic therapy, we normally start the session with, okay, so what do you want? And then we build up like a grid of possibilities. What do you need to get there? What stops you? What resources do you need? How long do you need? Et cetera, et cetera. So we're building up a framework, and that works fine. In provocative style communications and provocative therapy, we start with what's the problem. So we're identifying the resistance that the client has that is creating and maintaining the problems, the stuck structure, the stuck problem. So if somebody has a difficulty in doing something, whether it's pregnancy, and I remember once I was in Hungary and I was about to do a workshop, and my host says, we have a woman here who wants to be a demo subject and do some private work outside the workshop. And I went, okay, but I'm working from like 9 till 7 each day. And I've got evening sessions and radio sessions on 2 days. The only slot I have is going to be like at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, thinking, okay, they're not going to go for that. And she went, yes, that'll be fine. I thought, damn. Okay. So it's 8 a.m. in the morning, and there's a sort of like tap on the hotel door, and in comes the translator with the woman whose problem I do not know yet what it is. And I'm thinking, okay, hopefully it's going to be mild anxiety, public speaking, something that I can do before breakfast, you know. So I say, okay, so what's the problem? And here it comes through the Hungarian translation, a problem with orgasms. Right. Thank you, universe. So straight away you go, okay, well, let's think about this. So what we're talking about is what's the nature of the problem? The nature of the problem in this case is a resistance to being able to let go. So when we talk in PCW, we talk about what's the nature of the problem, what makes it the problem that it is, and then what's the opposite of that. So if, for example, if we talked about anxiety, a common factor, we would say with any form of anxiety, you have to have anticipation, which means movement, which means going into the future, and it creates a problem state. Unlike excitement, which is the same kind of thing, it creates a problem state. So how is a person creating that? Through fast thinking, feeling, and then problem state. So we want less movement, less connection and association and orientation into the future, and more good feelings. So everything we do, whether it's in story terms, interrupting the client, using any of the provocative stances that we use, are orientated to doing the opposite of what's creating the problem state. There's your sort of working template for working with people.
Absolutely.
So a person comes and they say, well, I have a problem with getting pregnant. The question is, okay, so what's happening at the moment? And what do we want more of and what do we want less of? What's going to make it better? And let's stay away from what makes it worse. So in the back of your mind, you're looking at those things. But what Franck would do is he would elicit from the client all the necessary information rather than jump in and say, right, here's what you need to do with no information at all. So that's why it's so effective. Because if I say to you, okay, so what's the problem? You say, well, it's because blah, 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 blah. And then I can adopt many different positions to get more information or to challenge your thinking. So if you say, well, I feel anxious all the time, I'll go, what, like 24 hours a day? And you go, well, no, okay, not 24 hours. Okay, 23 then. Well, no, not. I'm already breaking down the generalization.
Absolutely.
Okay. There is also Laurent who asked a question, and he asked it many years ago when I was doing a hypnosis training with him. And he said, because something is being said about Franck and Carl Rogers, and we don't know whether it's true. Perhaps you will know about that. Apparently, not a long time before Carl Rogers died, somebody asked him if you could start again a new life, a new career, would you have made the same choices and the same orientations? And he would have said, if now I could start my career again, I would have followed Franck Farrelly.
Yeah, that's true. I can say
true?
that's definitely true. Yeah.
Okay. Because this is often being said, and I could never find any evidence of that.
Confirmation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was said to a student of Franck's, who was also somebody who was also training with Carl Rogers, who later Franck heard that Carl had talked about his work. And Franck said, what did Carl say? And the student said, well, he said, and he gave a sort of like, he said, no, exactly what did he say? Repeat word for word, what did he say? And he said, if I was starting out again now in working in therapy, I would be very interested in working along the lines that Franck's working along. So yeah, I can confirm that.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Great. Isabelle is asking, do you need to be fundamentally those are the questions,
the real questions
made by people, okay? Do you need to be fundamentally bad person to be able to provoke well? Well,
not sure what a bad person is. So okay. First of all, we'd have to say, what is a bad person as opposed to a good person, which is entirely subjective. You know, let's remember in America, 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. I would never vote for Donald Trump. 80 million people voted for Joe Biden. So it's a subjective judgment on people. So let's park that for a minute and think, well, what do you need to be somebody who can work effectively with clients and help stimulate or provoke useful change? Number one, Franck used to say, you have to really care about people. If you don't care about people, then this is not the work for you. Number two, you have to be able to pay attention to what's going on, and you have to watch and listen, have the flexibility to work in the here and now, and also to be more interested in the client's progress and change than you are in your own insecurities and hang-ups. Well, that rules out a lot of people straight away. The second thing is that we're not just working with techniques where it's like, okay, now we're going to do, it's a bit like NLP or hypnosis aerobics. Okay, then first we're going to do this and then this and then this. We're not working like that. We're working very precisely in the here and now, in a friendly manner, to get the client to start to think differently so they are empowered to affirm the new behavior. That's the difference. So you have to really see this in action to be a client to properly experience the process. Because and I understand the confusion. I mean, when I first saw Franck working, even though I was already a trainer in NLP, I was looking at it and going, what on earth's going on? So I understand the mystification, but already all around the world, I've got a whole base of students who are getting great results with clients by following these principles. And they have already been established trainers in their own right. People like Steve Andreas, God bless him, was a massive enthusiast for the PCW model and hosted me a number of times in Boulder. And also I was asked to train in San Francisco at Robert Dilts's, two Robert Dilts's conferences with the host of all the NLP people on the West Coast coming to these workshops. So I know that this works as a model. People have to make up their own minds. Is it something that they are interested in? Nothing works 100%, despite what you read online and in Facebook. If people say you get 100% success in any one session, that is absolute nonsense. I have seen co-creators of NLP do demonstrations that have been like a car crash. Not everything works, but the flexibility of the model gives many, many different opportunities to create and facilitate change for the client.
Okay, thank you. And this question is a bit tricky. It's from Ruben. He's asking, is provocation useful when the person or the client is also himself a provoker? So in order to deal with problems. So if there are two provokers, the therapist and the client, does it work?
Well, we have to say, what does he mean by a provoker?
Yeah,
I've never had anybody who's come along and say, I've filled in my client notes, and by the way, I'm a provoker. You know? We're talking about, without going down the rabbit hole of analysis, because a lot of these things, we've got to look at content, say, what do we mean by bad person, provoker? Explain to me what a provoker is, and then I can answer the question better. Or a bad person, I can give some context, but I'll give my best shot at it, which is somebody who is skilled in using this approach has vastly more resources and insights than your standard therapy or your standard way of working. They've got many ways that they can go in a situation, and a flexibility, a little bit like if you think classic martial arts forms, and then somebody like Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee comes in, he incorporates everything that's been before, studies it, finds out the very best methods, puts them all into one system that's completely fluid. Now he's able to work in many different styles simultaneously without being caught in the rigidity. PCW is exactly like that. Take the very best from NLP, the very best from hypnosis, the very best from metaphor explorations, the very best from Franck's work, bring it all together and distill it, and then test it and test it and test it with all kinds of different clients. Does it work 100%? Absolutely not. Nothing works 100%, but very high success rate and very good satisfaction rate. And that's partly why there's so much interest in teaching the model around the world, as well as, of course, online.
Yes. Actually, the next question is kind of related to that. Is provocative therapy for every client? Stéphane is asking that.
For every client?
Can we use provocative therapy with everyone? Is it useful for every client?
Okay, so for everyone from the pygmies in the Amazon rainforest to people, old grannies in nursing homes, to people who are completely deaf and have no sight whatsoever, to serial killers, to, well, no, there's no approach that's going to work for everyone. There's your answer. No, there's no approach that's going to work for everyone, because first of all, you need a buy-in from the client to be interested in the change in the first place. And secondly, it will depend very much upon the interaction that's created in the session between the coach or therapist and whoever the client is. So no approach will do that. And that's good. That means there's lots more ways to explore and to look at things and to think about things.
What would be the perfect client for provocative therapy?
Someone who's interested in wanting to change. Anyone who's genuinely interested in wanting to change. I have a whole range of different types of clients. I've got a client this week contacted me online, teenager, teenager, okay, 20-year-old still, close enough to teenager, major problem, living in Massachusetts, you know, tried loads and loads of other things for this problem, says I'm very limited on money. I go, don't worry about that. Pay me what you can afford to do. But first, let's do a Skype and find out what it is that the issue is. He tells me what the issue is, and straight away I go, I recognize this. I've seen this before. There's a high likelihood that at the moment he's thinking in this particular way, which creates this outcome. So I talk to him about similar clients, and he goes, oh my God, that sounds exactly like me. You're the only person who's ever talked about this in any real sense. Normally people will talk theoretically about the thing, general relaxation, or we're into the psychotherapeutic archaeological dig, book the next 3 months into therapy. So I'll be seeing him later on this week, and I'm reasonably confident I'll be able to do a good job with him, because I've already tracked from talking to him some of the things which I've noticed that are the common factors in creating the problem. But who knows? We'll find out.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Laurence is asking, is provocative therapy only usable with individuals or also with groups, in groups?
No, it works with groups as well. Franck worked with groups. And also when I was in Moscow, and suddenly I got like 140 Russians, and I'm thinking, that's going to be interesting, because I've got to think about this differently in terms of the dynamics of exercises. Because whenever I do workshops, whether it's online trainings or live trainings, I'm a great believer in that there's like demonstrations, discussions, and exercises. You know, everything just keeps moving at some kind of rate. So I do corporate work where I use the PCW model. Very successful work with one particular software company where I trained all their top people. I've got another company at the moment that I'm on a corporate retainer for, that's in France, that I'll be working with this week and every other week on both a group basis and individual basis. And also I've got a 1-year training with people from all over the world that meet online every second Saturday in each month. And I'll do demonstrations, and then they'll do group and interactions as well. So they get to practice and develop and get in the bone the skills. So it's a different way of working. Some of my students work, I can think of 2 that work extensively with groups in corporate settings. So it'll work for both groups and individuals.
Wow. Marc is asking, how can provocative therapy impact people's internal perceptions and self-talk?
How can it? Very easily. I mean, in fact, it's the best possible way of impacting people's self-talk. Think about it. Most people who come to a therapist or a coach come for some behavioral pattern, which is where there is some anticipation of thinking in the same way. They think this, they feel this, and they do this. A lot of different behavioral patterns. Anxiety pattern would fit that. Phobia pattern would fit that. Jealousy would fit that. Very similar. They're orientated along a sequence to produce things in a particular way. The provocative style is an interruption of that sequence. So in PCW and provocative therapy, we have lots of different stances that we will work with a client. So if we start the question off with, okay, so what's the problem? We then have many ways and stances we can approach with a client. So for example, this is the world stance.
Mm-hmm.
We can go into universal principles and say, well, you know, in the big scheme of things, people are in Switzerland, you know what they're like. It's all cuckoo clocks and eating cheese. Yeah. If you were living somewhere else, it would be completely different. So we can take that as a stance. We can go into misunderstand the client stance. Highly, highly unusual and very different to anything else, where you feedback something that's clearly not the case, and the client then affirms what it is that's a problem. In the affirmation for NLPers watching this, they're essentially doing a some modality shift in going back and checking and then coming back out again. So that can be highly effective. Simple things like talk louder. You'd be amazed, a lot of people just work at one tempo, one volume. In normal communication, people have a range of different things that are going on. Other ones here, I'll give you one more, a couple more. A, B, or C, give the client options. So would you say you are like super intelligent, average intelligence, or lift doesn't go to the top floor? So you're giving people analog options. And then one of my absolute favorites, blame the client. You know, that's always a good way to get things moving in the internal dialogue. As well as using the stances in PCW, there are specific set pieces for changing internal representations. And one of those was the voice tempo exercise, which Steve Andreas wrote up in his book, Transforming Negative Self-Talk, Volume 1. And I've used that with realistically about 7,500 to 7,600 clients. And I have never had a situation where it's not worked on changing the internal dialogue. I used it with the channel swimmer and I used it with the athlete I talked about. Absolutely gone. No sense to it at all.
I had the opportunity because you invited me to a class with your group, and I had the opportunity to experience how you changed my internal dialogue, and it was amazing. The result was so fun because it was methodical, simple. Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Here's the thing, everything that I've learned in personal change has taught me that everything is about micro adjustments and working conversationally and paying attention to what's going on. This is all about the precision of finding the difference that makes the difference. And that's really what we're about. I'm really interested in constantly refining and finding better ways to work. You know, it's not just sort of like, you know, this tablets of stone from myself down to the people around the world. I'm interested in empowering people to develop a huge range of skills. You know, we have practitioners in PCW. By the end of this year, we'll have advanced practitioners. Next year, I'll be looking at trainers as well. And we're constantly looking at how this is applied and how this can help people in a whole range of different environments.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we also have Eleonore who is asking, is provocative therapy also using some form of hypnosis openly or hidden?
Well, okay. When people used to talk to Franck about provocative therapy and provocative style and talk about hypnosis, and Franck would go, I'm not having anybody dancing with a broom like they think they're with Elvis. He had this very stereotypical idea of hypnosis. But a lot of people who work with Franck and who work with me would talk about being in a different altered state or a trance state. I think you'll verify that from when we did that.
Absolutely, yes.
Right? You just go, what is going on? You know, The difference is any sensory engagement with a client in any form of communication can legitimately be called a form of hypnosis. Classic definition is fixed attention to one point to the exclusion of everything else. So if you're watching a great movie, or if you're entranced by something, or if you're listening to something, that sensory engagement can all be talked of and properly confirmed as a form of hypnosis. So in that sense, the PCW process, which is very strong associations and changing associations with client, is all hypnosis, but not in the classic sense where people sort of come out with a slightly strange voice and then start to go into a bit of an odd exchange. You know, when I teach trance work in PCW, which is different to what Franck would do, it's all about precision and also paying attention to the rhythm, the speed, and how you sequence things with people. So in PCW, there's a whole hypnotic element and there's a whole metaphorical element, which we're going to be doing this Saturday, where we talk about in metaphors how people are. So if I say to you, okay, so, well, conversationally, so, well, that problem that you've had up until now, well, what's that like? Problem up until now presupposes marks for change. What's that like? Presupposes it's like something. Sit, wait for response. You may say, well, you know, it's kind of like wading through mud. Then I go to my stances and I can challenge that by going, wow, really? Surprise stance. So what, like wading through water, misunderstand the client stance. You come back and go, well, no, it's like, then you're starting to change the generalization. I can also say, okay, so Nathalie, so what's it really like? That's a different question. What's it been like up until now is a different question. What's the whole thing like is a different question. All of these, and we're going to talk about it at the weekend, bring different dynamic energy and shift the client in different ways.
Yes, but the presuppositions are amazingly powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Andrea is asking a question. Is provocative therapy also taking into account the body, or is it just about the mind?
Well, I think it's useful to have a client with a body. I've never had a client which has just got the mind, you know, some sort of discorporate entity where I go, well, there's no body there, but I can hear some words coming from the astral realm. No, in simple terms, you're looking at the complete verbal and non-reactions from the client. If you're working with a client, one of the things I'll look at is, okay, so if I move into the client's space, then I'm going to create some kind of change. If I sit back, it's going to produce a change. The speed at how I interact is going to produce a change. If I touch the client, it's going to produce a change. If I ignore the client, it's going to produce a change. I'm constantly looking for changes verbally and non-verbally with what's actually going on. So the answer is you're looking at everything and listening to everything.
Okay.
Yes, we also have Delia, who is asking, is provocation a kind of pattern interrupt?
Yeah, a lot of it is a pattern interrupt, because what you want to do is you want to interrupt the pre-existing problematic strategy. So when people say, well, yes, but if you provoke, i.e. interrupt something, then what might happen? And I would say, well, okay, here's another option. Do nothing. You're not provoking anything different. We'll just sit here and see if anything happens. And that will be 5,000 euros. Thank you very much for dropping by. Not that ethical, I would say. So a lot of it is a pattern interrupt of the often digital logical sequence, which has been happening previously. Because what we know for sure is the client keeps thinking, feeling, and behaving in the same way.
Mm.
So in order to help them, we want to get them out of that particular way of thinking and to produce something different and something new. Mostly what happens is people come with definite problem state. By working with the practitioner, they go into an intermediate, I'm not really sure what the hell's going on here state, as you will verify.
Yes.
And then by doing some more work, it grounds into something else. Bearing in mind, in PCW, every client session is recorded for them to listen back from a third position. That's very different to a lot of other approaches. And in the recordings, we're marking out in anticipation of how the client's going to think back in the future.
Wow.
So it's easy once you simplify and get things clearer rather than analyze too much. So if I was working with you and I was already getting information coming back, I would say, as you're listening to the session now, you've already noticed, and I'll feedback your metaphors and observations and feedback what you've noticed. And the more you listen to this, you can also have the opportunity to take whatever is useful for you, that's right for you right now, and leave behind whatever's just best left behind, right? So we're working faster mostly than people are processing. But that requires developing an ease, and that requires practice.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And well, we have a last question from Romane. Romane says, how was Franck in everyday life?
Hysterical. Franck, I love this question. I'm glad you kept it. Franck, when I first spoke to Franck, and as I said, okay, I'd like to host you in the UK. Okay, you got any money? Yeah, I do have money and also skills. And we talk a little bit about, what we like, and we get onto the subject of movies. And I go, oh yeah, I'm a big lover of movies. I mean, I said, we have like a big home cinema set up here. Oh yeah? How big? Well, big screen and 7.1 system, high-end audio, big size. All right. Franck comes over to stay, and he's recording an audio version of his second book called Me and God, which at that time was only available in German. So I said, well, I've got to learn German to read this book. You've got to be kidding me. So we record an audio version of it, and he finishes that. We allow 10 days to do this. It's 33,000 words. We allow 10 days. Franck does it in 4 days with 3 additional second takes. Otherwise, perfect. That's a lot of work, So we finish. We got lots of time to finish. So we go, okay, well, hey, shall we watch some movies? Oh yeah. So I go, Franck, there's a new series which has been out. I don't know if you saw it. I say called Deadwood, which is like a Western series on HBO. We have all 3 seasons of this. So it's something like, 40 hours worth of stuff. And we proceed to watch this Western Deadwood on this giant screen, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning with breakfast and working our way through till midnight for 3 days, 3 days solid. By day 2, I'm actually hallucinating being in the Wild West. And at the end of every episode, I go, okay, Franck, shall we have another one? Oh, yeah, go on. And then he'll periodically call out to my wife, Sue, yes, Franck, how can we help you? Any chance of a cup of tea? Yes, we're on it. So he was really interested in movies, in music as well. He used to love sort of like singing, classic sort of old sort of Latin type songs. Love going to shopping malls, interacting, meeting people. Was just really interested in and a curiosity about people and life and movies, music, anything which was getting attention.
Yes.
Never dull, not for 1 minute. When we used to do workshops, he would go out with the entire group. You'd have like, 30 people on this table, which, let me tell you, from a getting the bill point of view, never do that. It's an absolute nightmare. So yeah, he was greatly missed and was absolutely off the scale in terms of skills. I've seen a lot of people, I've trained with some very highly skilled people, and Franck was just on another level, like the Jimi Hendrix of therapy, absolutely mind-blowing.
Yes, I do remember he was very accessible, and we went to have some beers after the seminar, and the night before also we had like a cocktail party, and he was accessible. He would
I've been on
answer
trainings where it's almost like
amazing,
like George Clooney status, step away from the trainer. I mean, okay, I understand that the poor suffering trainer, they're working all day long. They don't necessarily want to be sociable, but it's like, it's a very different dynamic. And he always had the view that we're all here to learn in different ways. He had a genuine interest in people, was completely congruent both in work and in trainings and outside socially, really no different. Yeah.
Yes, I absolutely confirm that.
Okay, so we finished the list of questions. Congratulations.
Well, hey, and they weren't bad as well. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I thought, oh God, I hope we're not going to get some crazy question. But no, I mean, I think by asking questions, we learn about stuff. When I first started to watch Franck, the problem I had was I didn't really know what to make of it. I'm just going, what is it? Part of my job over the last 15 years is to really break down, deconstruct what he does, and to be able to teach it in a way so other people can not only use his skills, but expand and use all the other elements at work as well. So we have people in Japan, in Croatia, in America, in Germany, in Ireland, in Spain, all over the world using this system of change and personal development.
Thank you so much, Nick, for your time, your wisdom. Also, you are very accessible, and thank you really for all these answers that I am sure people are going to be delighted to experience. Yeah, so
you're really welcome. I mean, the thing I would say is that this is constantly a process of development and refinement. I've been doing this now. I've been in personal change since 1979, and what are we now? 2021. God Almighty. I'm still learning and figuring stuff out, but I can teach many times faster what I've already learned than I had to learn back when I first came across Franck. Because not only do we have all the material that we can look at, I've got thousands of hours of every single session I've ever done recorded, every workshop I've ever done videoed. So we could really strip it back into teachable principles. And ultimately, this is really about helping people. That's the key thing. And that means a whole full demographic of people at every single level, not just these sort of medium wealthy people driving around in their BMWs. Franck was keen that it's accessible to a wide range of people. I've had people that are multimillionaires. I have people who haven't got 2 pennies to rub together, and everything in between.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
We appreciate and we wish you all the best.
Yes.
And
thank you so much. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me directly, you can go to provocativechangeworks.com or email info at nickkemp.com. And the therapy website, if anybody's bouncing off the walls with COVID or has any strange anxieties, is provocativtherapy.com. That's where you'll find a lot of the testimonials and the channel swimmer footage as well. So great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really, you are very, very accessible, and it's a lot of fun to attend your trainings and to be there. And thank you, really, Nick.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And all of you, thank you for your attention. Thank you for being with us, and see you, Nick.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.